joining us. Okay, let's see. All right. Kara put together this presentation. I sent her some pictures, and Kara did a great job organizing them and putting them into a form that looks really good. This presentation is entitled In Living Color, A Quilter's Journey. I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in New Jersey. I still live here in New Jersey. I am an educator by profession. I'm a former special education teacher, and I currently work on the child study team, diagnosing learning disorders. I work with a psychologist and a social worker, and I work with high school students. So I am, however, transitioning. I'm going to retire at the end of this year, and I'm looking forward to being able to spend more time doing crafty things. Okay. Kara, can I advance this, or are you? Okay.
I'll advance it. Just let me know when.
Okay, great. I am, at first I was not a quilter. I started out making clothes. My mom is from South Carolina, and the connection is that if you are, at least in my experience, a girl of Southern heritage, you're supposed to know how to do certain things: cook, clean, sew. So you made clothes, you did curtains, you did other things. I have mastered cooking and sewing. I'm not so good at the housekeeping part of it. And I started this particular coat. This is a jazz coat. Music is one of my interests. And I started this coat with sew along with a national folk artist, Rachel Clark. Rachel's been on Quilting Arts and some other sewing or craft related shows. So this coat is a combination of patchwork and applique. The instruments that are featured on the coat are, I use clip art images and enlarge them, and then, you know, play with the fabric choices. So I have a cello, a banjo, a rattle drum on the corner, and I have the G clef, of course. That's for my first initial, and I put it over my heart. I've got the notes on a pink background that kind of interweaves throughout the coat. And of course, I have the keyboard on the bottom. And in my other life, I really wish I could play the piano better than I do. I play a little, but not enough. My fantasy during retirement is to be able to play more. The sleeves on the coat is actually where I started. Because, you know, I've got pretty good sized arms. So I did a Muslim markup. And then I discovered that the sleeves were really too snug for me. And so I kept thinking, how can I make this coat and allow enough room for my upper arms? And so I really made it big so that it kind of mimics a djembe drum. Karen, we can go to the next slide. So on the back of the coat, on the left, you can see the coat spread out. And the instrument closest to the top is in fact a djembe drum. It's like it's usually carved out of wood with animal skin stretched over the top. So the sleeves are pretty big up until about just below the elbow, and then it has a tighter fit. And of course, the other instruments I have there are, you know, trumpet, a rattle, and a saxophone. And you see the piano keys really surround the coat. You guys can chime in with questions if you have them. I did make the coat to fit me, and it is a wonderful coat to wear. I have a lot of fun with it. It was in a local exhibit, and I just picked it up again last week from the Morris Museum. We had a textile exhibit honoring a local quilter who passed away a couple of years ago. So a lot of her pieces were there, and several people who are affiliated with her. And yes, the instruments are applique. The patchwork is on the sleeve. The way the sleeve was constructed is more patchwork. And the coat is fully lined, and the buttons on the front are, the large part of the button is a coconut shell, and it's stacked, and then there's a metal button on top of it. All right. Any other questions about the coat? The ribbon that goes around the coat with the staff and the notes on it, I had to put ribbon underneath it so you could see the notes. Otherwise, it's on a black denim background and you wouldn't be able to see it. So I have fun wearing that coat, and it is fully lined. Thanks. All right, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is inspired and determined. I started this quilt actually because my quilting guild did a project in honor of the 19th Amendment where women received the right to vote. We focused on African-American suffragists because not everybody got the right to vote during the 19th Amendment when that was passed. In the course of our research, my two suffragists that I researched were Sojourner Truth and Mary McLeod Bethune. And in the course of looking for information about them, I discovered both of these women have postage stamps from the United States Postal Service. And so I started looking to see who else might have stamps. And so I did this project with the African-American women who were commemorated by the United States Postal Service. Now, I think I've gotten 4 spots on the front of that quilt where I acknowledge that these images were courtesy of the post office. I had to write them, get permission, tell them that we were going to use it for educational purposes, you know, all that kind of stuff. But this was really a very neat project to do. So the images were transferred onto fabric sheets that I ran through my printer. I have some patchwork, and then I have embroidery between the rows. So it's a combination of patchwork and machine quilting and embroidery. Questions about that one? I think there's another one, Kara, with the, yeah, so that's a close-up. So in order to be commemorated on a stamp, you have to be deceased, and I think there's a minimum of 2 years before you're eligible for it. So I did this patchwork around the images, and then I have applique on, like in 4 different locations on the front where I acknowledge that these images are courtesy of the Postal Service. I think the people we have from Harriet Tubman to Gwen Ifill, who died a few years ago. So while I was working on it, Gwen Ifill's stamp was issued. Okay, all right, we can go to the next one. So sometimes my subject matter is kind of whimsical. This is a doll, and we had a challenge in our guild called Life is Short, Eat Dessert First. So I have this doll, and the title of this quilt is Ode to Market Street. Market Street, on Market Street is a children's book, it's an alphabet book, but each page shows pictures of things that begin with that particular letter of the alphabet. So I have desserts, lots of desserts, that I use to construct this doll. So her bracelets are donuts. She's got ice cream sundae on her hair. There's chocolate covered strawberries, chocolate chip cookies, brownies, cupcakes, etc. I think the ring on her hand is a cherry. We've got chocolate covered pretzels. And so around the border, I also have some other desserts. the most fun part of doing this was collecting the fabrics, that novelty fabrics that had these images on it. So that was really quite a lot of fun to do. It's a wall size quilt, but this was fun. This On Market Street is one of the books I read my children when, and I think I still have a couple of copies of that book. Anita Lobel was the author, and I think her husband was the illustrator. So it's a homage to her, because that was a delightful book. Nice way to introduce alphabet letters to kids, and it was fun collecting these fabrics. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, this is a jacket that I made, and the foundation of the jacket is a sweatshirt. So I don't know, some of the quilters here may have made sweatshirt jackets. So what you do is cut the crew neck away from the sweatshirt and the cuffs and the hem. And then you open out the sweatshirt, lay it flat, and then lay your fabrics on top. So this is mostly applique, but raw edge applique. It took me a while to do this because I don't know, sometimes I just don't follow directions when I'm supposed to. And so I didn't allow enough overlap initially when I was constructing this jacket. But I do wear it. And then I decided somewhere along the line that I really wanted it to be longer, because once you cut the band off of a sweatshirt, it's kind of short. Maybe it's like waist length. And I wanted it a little bit longer, and also wanted the sleeves longer. So then I added on to it. I just kept going. So my jacket has taken a few turns, and I wear this jacket actually a lot. The front of the jacket, Carol, you can go to the next slide. The front of the jacket, again, where you see the first row of the black and white fabric, that's where the jacket stopped at first. And then I added on that last border. I don't have buttonholes on it. I have loops for the buttons. And a friend gave me the buttons, actually. I always admired them. She got them off of she found an old coat in a thrift shop or consignment shop. And the buttons are really neat. They're wooden and they feel really smooth. And so one day I commented on it to her, and she just cut them off. She says, you know, I'm not going to wear this coat anymore. And she gave me the buttons. So I've got nice memories of the button donation. It is washable. And I didn't pre-shrink the fabrics because there's so much stitching on them that I don't think it's gonna pucker too much. There's a lot of stitching on them. I use like a little serpentine stitch from my machine. I did not pre-shrink the fabrics. And I probably would just send it to the cleaners rather than wash it by machine. And it's got a regular binding around the edges, the cuffs and the neck edge and the front. It's all regular binding technique for quilting. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Well, I have a question. How do you
Sure.
select so many prints and have them go together, but they're so different and unique? But how do you even begin to think about the color story and all of that?
Go back to the previous slide. I actually started on the back. So the part in the center, some of that's already one fabric. And then I put a black and white border around it. You see where, I don't know if I can indicate where it is. So then I started pulling colors out of that. So I pulled a lot of golds out of it. I pulled some oranges out of it. I pulled some pinks out of it. And once I got to black and white, then I put some other fabrics in that had black in it. And there was black and red. And then I went to red and black. So I that's how I did it. I didn't start out with a color scheme in mind. I started out with a print that had a lot of colors in, and then I pulled other things that would coincide with it. All right, so here, these are fabric postcards. I belong to a Facebook group that is doing some projects with the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cambridge, Maryland. And the director of that museum is duplicating Harriet Tubman's walk to freedom. So last year, she and a few people who trained for this walk, it's 116 miles. They did the walk last year, it was all on foot. They stopped, they stayed places overnight, they went back to the same location and continued the walk. Harriet Tubman did this walk to freedom, helping enslaved people escape 13 times. And so the director of this museum is going to duplicate Harriet's walks or passages to freedom. The first one was by foot completely. Some others will be by coach. Some others will be by boat. Some others will be a combination. So every year she's doing this walk, and we did fabric postcards to commemorate the walk. So the two postcards in the upper left are some little experiments I was doing. I've been doing a lot of flag work. I'm not sure why, but I do the American flag in different forms. And one of the quilts that we're going to see, the flag is in blues. This one is in red, black, and green. And I played with constructing the stars, indicating stars as well as stripes. Some of the stripes are wavy, some are straight. The postcard on the right is one of the civil rights leaders for whom I have particular affinity, Fannie Lou Hamer, who brought a group of disenfranchised voters to New Jersey to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. And the group she brought was not seated by the Democratic convention. There were two delegations from Mississippi, and she fought for the right to vote and advancing civil rights for a long time. In fact, one of her quotes that's a favorite of mine is sick and tired of being sick and tired. So that when you are fed up, that you need to do something about it. And she is really inspirational to me. We go to the next slide. So those are three of the postcards I did for the Harriet Tubman Museum, and then here are two more. There were two stamps about Harriet Tubman in the Postal Service. So one, I did photo transfer again onto fabric sheets, and I did a permanent marker that indicates that it was, it's a canceled stamp. And the other one, I did a little applique, machine applique representation of Harriet on this other stamp. And you see the difference in the price. They were issued at very different times when the price of a first class stamp was very different. I think Harriet was one of the first African-American women to be honored on a postage stamp. I used like a stiff interfacing like Peltex or Timtex. And then I didn't send a picture of that, but the back of those fabric postcards have the lines and the dividing section like you would find on the postcard. I also did something interesting. I wish I had sent a picture of that. I shrunk one of the postage stamps so it would fit into the slot on the back. I don't know if I have it. No, I don't see it now. I kind of work all over the house. So I thought I might have it here. But on the back, I actually have a stamp, a representation of a stamp where it would be on the back of a postcard. Okay, we can go to the next one. Oh, and that's machine quilted, by the way, with satin stitch around. This quilt is called Mr. Phil, and it's inspired by an older gentleman I met in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, which is where my ex-husband grew up. St. Simon's Island is one of the sea islands, excuse me, off the coast of Georgia. It's between Charleston and Savannah, and before Jacksonville, Florida. So Mr. Phil was an older gentleman. He lived with Miss Azzy Lee. Now, I had planned to make a quilt honoring her as well. I kind of haven't gotten to it. But he was an older gentleman. He was infirm by the time I met him, but beloved by everybody in the neighborhood. And so I have these primitive dolls that have, what do you call those? Union suits, you know, like they're not quite overalls, but they're underwear. And my original plan for this quilt was to make these like primitive dolls and maybe have like 12 of them, 3 across, 4 down. And I arranged them like that. They're all on, I repeat the background, 1, 2, 3, 4 backgrounds, and 3 different homespun fabrics for the union suits. And when I assembled them as I originally planned, it just seemed too crowded. It seemed something. So I moved it out, and what was going to be my original design became the border. And then I had to figure out something that goes in the middle to complete the quilt. So I have log cabin blocks, also made with the homespun fabric, and an applique. This is hand applique and hand quilted. The center is an old, you know, kind of ramshackle house and a weedy yard. And I put a clothesline in the front. And these are miniature little union suits, all again out of the same fabric that dolls are wearing. And I don't know if you probably can't see it too well, but I have tiny little clothespins, the little ones that you press, and that's on the top of the union suits, holding them on the clothesline. So I've got, I used a variety of techniques. The log cabin blocks were machine pieced, and the dolls were machine pieced, and they're blocks. But the image in the center is hand applique and hand quilted. The rest of it is machine quilted. Every now and then I keep thinking I should put some more work on it. So I think I've started to do some embroidery on that, like the white background areas. So it's kind of finished, but not really. All right, we can go to the next one. All right, so some of the things I make are just fun. We have, my quilting guild does, we host shows every 2 years at the Historical Society in Montclair. And one year in particular, we made fabric houses, again, using that very stiff interfacing, Tentex, Peltex. And so my house is from The Wizard of Oz. This is the house that got caught up in a tornado and fell on the Wicked Witch. And so what you see from the house is the legs of the Wicked Witch, the ruby red slippers, and the house is not in good shape. So it's tacked loosely because I figured if your house goes through a tornado, it's not intact. So the windows are kind of crooked and ramshackled. And I remember from the movie, The Wizard of Oz, that they have a lot of really supersized flowers. And so that's what I made the roof out of, some floral material. And then on the bottom of the house is this flattened witch. So I get a kick out of this house, and I've actually had it at work sometime. And when students come in my office, they're amused by it. And then when they turn it over, they're really surprised to see this image of a flattened witch on the bottom of the house. I did not send a picture, but on the other side is the words to the song. When the munchkins start singing about the house began to twitch and the kitchen took a switch and landed on the wicked bitch. So some of the things I make are just whimsical, just fun. And her slippers, it's about 8 by 10. The highest point is not as tall as a sheet of paper. Yeah. And I tried to actually write the words on part of it, but you can't read them as well. So I just kept thinking, you know, if the house goes through a tornado, it's not gonna look so good. All right, we can go to the next one. All right, one of the other things that I was interested in doing is portraits. So the picture on the right is the picture I used to do this technique. I've taken a couple of classes with Bisa Butler, who just had this huge show at the Art Institute of Chicago. Bisa does fabric portraits, and I have attempted this technique without her direction or patterns, etc. This is my first solo attempt that was successful. This is applique, this is raw edge applique, but there's adhesive. I use heat and bond underneath the fabric and then cut out the image or shapes that I want. So the picture I have on the right, I took that with my camera phone and I enlarged it. And then I went through and started drawing around the areas that were highlighted. And I ended up using a value scale to try and make sure I got the image, the lights and dark areas correct, so that the portrait really looked like me. So I think this was a pretty successful attempt. But sometimes I'm not really done with things once I finish with them. So the background has these floral leaves, and I think I'm going to add another border to this because it's not quite right. I can be a little OCD and like to tweak things a bit. All right, we can go to the next one. The next two pictures are close-ups of the portrait, the self-portrait. Now, I use a variety of fabrics, and once I have the adhesive on the back of fabrics, I keep my scraps. I keep my scraps because I hate to waste. And if sometimes you just need a little snippet of something. So I have snippets of fabrics in all sorts of tones, from very light to very dark. And then once they're ironed in place, you know, I got the adhesive on them, and then I go back and I stitch it on the machine. There's one more, I think, Kara, the next one. Yeah, this is a close-up of the cheek area, part of the lip and the nose. I got a lot of fabric. I'm a fabricaholic, I confess. So, and then once the adhesive is on, I just save it. I save it in using different things. Okay, question?
I have a question. Yeah. So how many layers of fabric are built up here that you're then sewing through, or do you cut it out and?
No, I start with a foundation. So the blue fabric with the little polka dot things on it, that print is my base. And then I added the other snippets on top of it. So I'm probably not sewing through more than 3 or 4 layers at any spot. where there's a lot of fabric snippets.
Yeah, so we do have a question. Oh, am I muted? We do have a question. How large is this piece, and do you organize your snippets by color?
I don't organize them by color. I try to organize them by value. So I have the ones that read very light. I went to the Dollar Tree and got, I don't know, like 1 pound containers. And I have all the very light ones in one box. And I put number one on the outside of the box. Oh, here's the other thing I have to have. I need clear containers so I can see what's in them. So I have 12 containers with these snippets of fabrics that already have the adhesive backing on them. And I numbered them 1 through 12, and the very darkest ones go in 12. So the darkest ones aren't always black. Sometimes they're a really dark green or a very dark purple or a dark blue. And the very light ones, some of them are not only white, but they're yellows or very pale blues. So I separate it not by color, but by value. There's a value scale that a lot of artists use where you go from white down several increments to darkest dark. And that's how I sorted the fabrics out. And once I had the portrait I was going to use, I numbered the areas that needed light, extra light, medium, medium dark, dark, dark. And then I picked the fabrics from there. Questions? Because I don't like to waste fabric, a lot of fabric that I use turns up in multiple pieces because the adhesive backing is already there. And so I use it. So some of the fabrics that are in this piece are in lots of other pieces I've done because I'm using snippets at a time. Or I might start out making a larger quilt and then I have all these scraps left over and I hate to waste, you know. Okay, we can go to the next one. Were there any other questions before we move on? Okay, so I think this is the last one, and this is one of my more recent pieces. This is called Motherless Child. And the inspiration for this is, I was horrified to discover that children were being taken from their mother's arms at the southern border. That for whatever you feel about immigrants coming to this country, my heart was breaking to hear that babies were taken out of their mother's arms. And I just thought, how do you take somebody's kid and just send the mother someplace and separate them? Like that level of trauma is going to stay with that kid forever. And I was reminded that that's not the first time in our country's history where families were separated. I thought about Japanese internment. I thought about Native American schools where those children were taken from their families. I thought about certainly in slavery when those children were viewed as commodities or property and sold, and without regard for the level of trauma or the grief that was caused. And so that was my inspiration for this piece. So I have here a map of Africa, and I had this fabric that had all these paper dolls. And I arranged the paper dolls on the continent of Africa in a way that mimics how some of the kidnapped Africans were arranged in the hull of a slave ship. So they were arranged for maximum capacity as they made their passage across the Atlantic Ocean. So I have these dolls. They're cute little girls, and the fabric is kind of bright and cheerful, but that belies the horror of what happened to them and what happened to other children that were taken from their parents. So this piece is very meaningful to me. In the middle of the continent, I duplicated a sign that was a public sale announcing the sale of a Negro girl, along with other items for sale. And, you know, they had this small child, 3 cows, a wheelbarrow, and other things. And this was an actual ad. And I put the year of the ad and the town in Middletown, Maryland. Um, so, and around the continent of Africa, I have the names of the tribes who had the most people taken from the continent in the Atlantic slave trade. And I'm a fairly religious person. The words of a old spiritual song, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. And so I have those words kind of swirling around the continent again. So yeah, it is an emotional piece for me. And I just keep thinking there are enough instances where trauma has been inflicted on vulnerable people that it seems like we should have learned the lesson by now. And that until we do, atrocities like this will continue. And I just think it's kind of sad. And so that's what this piece uh, was inspired by. That we haven't learned our lesson. So it's like deja vu. The shells on the edge are cowrie shells, and I wanted a little more embellishment on this piece. And it turns out that cowrie shells were used for money. It was an exchange medium. And so the root of slavery, of course, was financial gain. So that's so I have the cowrie shells on the bottom. The background is a batik fabric with like starfish and some other things on it. So most of it's machine quilted. The dolls were appliqued by machine. And then I did some hand stitching, like big stitches around the continent with like a variegated pearl cotton. So that's one of my recent pieces. And it's powerful. It's not, maybe it's 48 inches, maybe 48 inches wide, and maybe a little bit longer, maybe 52, 56 inches long, something like that. And again, I was thinking about kids and the dark brownish area I have around the public sale notice. Our alphabets have letters on, thinking like, wouldn't that have been nice if they could have learned something then? The paper dolls this fabric had clothing, so you could really change their clothing. And one of the really ironic things that happened, the people that survived the Middle Passage from Africa to America, of course, weren't fed well. And before they were offered for sale, they would be cleaned up, given food so they would look healthier, and then dressed up before they were sold. So I put a dress on one of the dolls and had her standing on what would have been an auction block. So yeah, that's a powerful piece. And I think that's our last one. So questions?
If you have a question, you can unmute yourself or type your question into the chat. Go ahead, Dorothy. You're muted right now.
Oh, they're okay. I was just saying, very impressive work, very detailed.
Thank
I
you.
loved them. And I was just wondering, how long does it take to make some of these pieces? They're so detailed.
I'm not a very disciplined sewer. So sometimes I'll start a piece and I have a design dilemma and I let it percolate. And then I might go on to something else. And then I'll get back to the other piece. So it doesn't make me very proficient, in terms of cranking something out. I wait until I solve a dilemma, and then I'm happier with the outcome. And even when it's finished, sometimes I still tweak, because I went back and did things to that jacket. I had worn that jacket several times, and then I decided, it's a little chilly because it wasn't at my wrist. And I'm like, well, why don't you put something on the bottom? So I got some more fabric and I added onto it. Mr. Phil, that large quilt, I finished that many years ago, but I think it needs a little something else. So I'm tweaking that too. So I don't really know how long. I think about it. I might have sketches. I might have ideas. And it's a starting point because I don't always end up where I think I'm going to end up. I don't always. Sometimes the fabric will lead me in a certain direction. Sometimes political events. Sometimes, I don't know, I'm just in a playful mood. And the quilt shows it. Quilt, the coat, the jacket.
I love the clothing that you had at the beginning, the jacket and that
Yeah.
that sweatshirt one. It was really wonderful, and I was very impressed.
Yeah, it's a sweatshirt foundation. And so I didn't need to put extra batting in it. And it's a very comfortable coat. And so when I wear it, it really feels like you're just pulling a sweatshirt on. Doesn't look like it, but it feels like you're wearing a sweatshirt.
No, no, it looks really fancy.
The jazz coat, when I submitted it for a show here in New Jersey, I kept thinking, because I had been wearing it, and I said, I'm gonna feel like I lost something. It wasn't for sale, it was simply for exhibit purposes. And I said, why don't you make another one? So I have this over here. So I made a doll size one.
I saw that.
So
Pretty
it's not
nice.
identical, but it's close enough.
Yeah, it's nice.
So I had to shrink everything down, and then I couldn't get the notes to go. It's just not enough room to work. But it was actually harder to do this than to make the original coat.
I would think so. It's so tiny.
Yes. And I thought, that's why doll clothes have those raglan sleeves. I actually have a 7-inch sleeve there. And I thought, that was dumb. You shouldn't have done that. You should have just pieced it so you could have a rag. And anyway, it was
Live and
harder to
learn.
do that. So that's why the doll clothes have that. But I have, my mom taught me to sew. Like I said, you had to learn how to cook and sew and clean. And I really found a way to combine my art interests and with things that women do traditionally to be creative at it. And when I retire, I'm going to play with fabric even more. I can't wait. So, were there other questions you had? You've been very attentive. I thank you.
I have a question. I'm
Sure.
curious about what are you inspired by now, or do you have a project that's percolating that you want to share, or something in the works that you're just kind of thinking on?
I got a lot of projects. Sometimes I make dolls. Sometimes like I've got another jacket I've been working on. This time I'm not going to have so many little pieces of fabric. I'm kind of over that. But I have some pieces of mud cloth, which is an African fabric that's tie-dyed and it's more whole cloth. So what I'm doing is hand embroidering, hand stitching around some of the swirls in the jacket. I've been working on that for years. So off and on, I pull it out, I'll do a few rows of the stitching and then hope I, didn't pucker it too much. And then if I have to put it away, I'll work on it some more. So I'm doing that. I'm trying to set up some space in the basement that, where I can really spread out and not take over the dining room table. I have many boxes of fabric, and I confess I'm a fabricaholic. I'm guilty as charged. But, when you get inspiration in the middle of the night, the fabric stores aren't open. And so you need these things around just so you can indulge and audition and change your mind, And so I don't have any particular project, but I've got so many in various stages of completion,
Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
So then a question from Mary, do you find fabrics online or in shops generally?
Generally in shops, although I'm doing more and more online shopping. And here's the other thing that happens. Once people find out you sew, you inherit fabric from people. They're happy to have it go to somebody who's going to appreciate it. If their mom passed on and they were an avid sewer, they are happy to make donations to you because they know you appreciate it and you'll do something creative with it. One of the things we have at my guild meetings, we have something we call table blessings. So somebody will bring in fabric or yarn or buttons or trims that they don't want anymore, or patterns or books, and you put them on the table and whoever wants can just take them. And so you acquire fabric, not just by shopping, because, I don't really need to go shopping for fabric. I'll never use all the fabric I have. I've made my peace with that. I've told my kids that too. So if something happens, make sure you call somebody in the guild and they get the fabric, because my kids they do creative things, but none of them are sewers, Went to culinary school, one paints, and she's doing IT stuff, and my son does other things that are creative, but none of them sew. They just humor me when I have fabric all over the house,
Doesn't sound like you have room to buy a big, one of those big quilter machines at all. It takes a whole room.
It does take a room, and somebody gave me a frame, but all the pieces weren't there and we never got it working, and I finally got rid of it. And I said, I'm gonna have to go to some of those fabric stores that have these frames set up and take the lessons and then quilt my big pieces there. But so far I've been quilting them on a domestic machine. So I do some handwork, and sometimes handwork is easier to manipulate than trying to get something under a machine where you've got to twist and turn a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I took my first quilting class when maybe 30 years ago. My oldest was a toddler, and I already knew how to make clothing. I knew how to use a sewing machine. The class was hand quilting and piecing. And when I was introduced to cutting with a rotary cutter and an acrylic ruler, I thought, you don't have to draw those things out with the templates and then cut them out and leave. I'm like, you can cut at the same time and measure. I thought that was the greatest thing.
I agree. That's when I started making quilts left and right. That
Yeah,
was wonderful, that rotary
it's just,
cutter.
yes, it's like a pizza wheel. It's just such a useful tool. And the acrylic ruler, you can see through it, measure and cut. Love it. On the quilt, Mr. Phil, the log cabin quilt block is my favorite. I find it has so many design possibilities in terms of color placement, value placement, and it's forgiving. So you can, depending on the size of your logs, you really can distort the block, the look of the block. So that's like my favorite, my absolute favorite quilt block. Yeah, they are around that landscape. And in this case, all of those log cabin blocks have black centers. You know, like the dolls. The dolls have, yeah. Yep, that's it. That's it, Karen. Thank you.
I couldn't get it to share. I don't know, but there's that.
Yeah, that's it. So that's my very favorite patchwork block, is the log cabin block. And something interesting about that block too, it's considered really quintessentially American. But there are mummy casings in Egypt that have the same pattern, the same symmetry and wrappings on mummies in Egypt. And those mummies are a lot older than this country. And so I kind of think of this block as archetypal, that if it shows up in ancient Egypt and we still find it pleasing, that I kind of think that connects us with not just early America, but really people all around the world. So that is my favorite patchwork block. I do a lot of applique work, but out of the patchwork pieces, that's the one. You can always find something to do, make a block with your leftover scraps with a log cabin.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.